Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI, where each week we explore how AI and cognitive technologies impact us daily, both professionally and personally. This podcast is sponsored by AI Time Journal and supported by WILDA, Women Leaders in Data and Artificial Intelligence. For those of you whom I've not met yet, my name is Melissa Drew, and I will be your host for this week's podcast. Today we have with us Peggy Tsai. Now, Peggy is the newly appointed Chief Data Officer for BigID. Now, BigID is a data intelligence program platform that enables organizations to understand their enterprise data, privacy protection, and perspective. Now, Peggy's background is deep knowledge in the regulatory compliance programs, data protection regulation, and understands and focuses that how your data and these new technologies of machine learning and artificial intelligence, married that with the challenges that you already have for data, Peggy is the person that you need to go talk to. Additionally, this year, Peggy also is the adjunct faculty. Now, this is really interesting, executive coach for the Chief Data Officer Certification Program at the Heinz School of Information Systems and Management at Carnegie Mellon. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm pleased to be here with you today.
You know, one of the things that we see on these podcasts is that nobody's journey is ever the same. And I always look at everyone's LinkedIn, and you started out with economics, and then you shifted into management information systems, which is where I'm at. That's my background. But I also noticed that you're one of probably the few people that I've met where you went from that background in college, and then you immediately went into that area within your career. So I'm really interested, because this is a very unique perspective. How did you shift from economics to management systems and information, and then decide that that's where you wanted to stay and kept with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Melissa. So I graduated from Cornell University in 2001 with a bachelor's in economics. And the reason why I chose economics at that time was I thought it was a very broad type of education that can give me in terms of opportunities, whether in business or if I wanted to explore other types of study. So I just saw it as a great general background. And I think within a couple of years after graduating, I just sort of fell immediately into a role. This was at S&P, Standard and Poor's Rating Services, and immediately fell into a role where it was in a data operations, a center of excellence role, where best practices in data management could be incorporated and infused across all the lines of business. So I feel like I kind of fell into that role very early on in my career, and I loved it. I loved the ability to grow, be able to expand my skill set, whether it was taking on new roles in technology or inside the business operation teams. So I thought it had such great flexibility, and it was all based on the premises of good data management principles. And those are the same principles that I learned back then that I'm still learning and applying today in even my role at BigID today.
You know, that's a really good segue to what your role is, and maybe a little bit more about what your company, because I know I didn't do it justice in the introduction. And then also, as this role of a data officer, what is your scope? What is it that how big is your umbrella?
Sure. So before I talk about my role at BigID, I just wanted to also share with those in the audience that I've spent my career in the financial services industry, right? So I mentioned working at Standard & Poor's. I've worked at insurance, AIG. I've worked at Morgan Stanley on the institutional side and wealth management side. So my career has always been a hands-on data practitioner, and I've taken on different roles in all the different companies I've been at, whether it's hands-on being a data steward, working data quality, running and managing a data governance program. So I run the gamut in terms of all the types of data management and data governance roles. So in the last 2 years, I decided to switch something completely different. I wanted to know what it was like to build a better product for my former self. Like if I, in my former roles in financial services, I was always looking at new technologies, how technologies could help with a lot of the issues that we were having. A lot of it is, as a data steward, the time it takes to manually curate and collect and validate data and data sets, working with my data science or analytics teams, trying to give them better data, and how do we work with compliance and legal teams faster and better. And a lot of my interesting part of my role back then was finding new technologies that could help us and that we could integrate into our technology stack. So that was, I realized I wanted to spend more time exploring that area again, which is another reason why I decided to work for a vendor and build a better product. So that's explanation of how I came into BigID. And I looked at many possible vendors and startups, and I was really intrigued by the fact that BigID focused on heavily on AI machine learning, looking heavily on metadata and data to really build out the data insights that a data steward needed in order to do its work. So by, ability to, these were really patented discovery algorithms that BigID had, and I thought was very compelling and very distinct in the marketplace. And what they do is build an inventory, which I think of it as a repository of all the metadata, business metadata, operational, technical metadata, and bring it together in a catalog in such a way that allows a data steward to search and find. And on top of that, BigID applies things like clustering and cataloging, the classifying and correlating the data to really bring additional insights that's not possible with the human eye or human intervention. So I thought, wow, imagine combining the power and the magnitude of what a machine learning algorithm can do, plus the subject matter expert of a data steward, and apply that in a whole end-to-end data governance lifecycle process. I thought very compelling, very innovative. And my role here is to expedite that even more and really develop some of these additional core capabilities of data governance that I think is much needed and it's missing in the marketplace today.
There's so much that you said that we can explore.
Yeah, I'll take a pause right there. And
so much there, and it's all great. And I think let's start with the last thing you said, and then we'll just work backward. You mentioned that you're there because you saw some gaps in your previous roles. What are some of the gaps that you're solving?
So I think it's the biggest gap is the time and effort it takes to for data governance teams to actually show return on value and return on their investment in their data governance program. A very common saying that I always heard was, don't boil the ocean. And that's when talking about the scope of data that's usually put in place for a data program. And the reason why a lot of chief data officers used to say that is because, one, they couldn't hire enough people. There weren't enough resources. So in order to show value, they wanted to limit the number of either critical data elements or limit the actual business processes that would be covered under a program or a project. And by keeping it very small, it would be something that could be delivered within a manageable amount of time. And it also would be able to demonstrate that something could be completed. But another problem with that is by keeping the scope so small and so limited, the effects and impact of that data being governed could not be seen on a larger scale. And therefore, many executives might not even see any value because it was done on such a small sliver of their data domain overall.
Right.
So there are definitely some pros and cons to choosing a small and manageable scope. But at the end of the day, if data governance programs cannot demonstrate large, quick wins, then unfortunately, that leads to a lot of de-escalation in the prioritization of the program, reduction in the workforce, and that leads to a lot of regulatory and compliance risks if companies do not have a fully funded data governance program.
Perfect segue, because one of the other things that I noted was you mentioned earlier the relationship between the legal teams and the compliance teams. And I haven't really explored that with a lot of folks yet. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about what you're doing there, and why is this really important?
Yeah, so data governance programs and I'm saying this in general for financial services companies because that is my personal background.
Right.
So I can say that with fair confidence. There are several reasons why data governance programs are funded. So another common saying that's always been said is the carrot and the stick. And the reason why data governance programs are created, the carrot representing a lot of the new business opportunities that can be created in terms of new products, new offerings, if there's a data governance program in place. But it's actually always the stick, which represents a lot of the, the legal and regulatory programs that really is the reason why financial service companies have funded a lot of data governance programs. And in order to comply with these programs, that's why they've had to be funded. So there's always been a strong relationship between legal and compliance because they're the ones that have dictated some of the needs in terms of specific regulatory reports or even internal audits. That those are the things that needed to be done, and a data governance program is the one that's best fit to really ensure compliance in terms of collecting the data, reporting on the data, and making sure that all the right business processes have been in place as well.
I was thinking about when you were talking, and you were talking about the challenges in the data governance, and it dawned on me that a lot of times we don't really focus on how much data we're actually talking about. I recently I looked up BigID, and there was a reference to petadata. And I don't think really a lot of us really understand the concepts of how large of these data sets when we talk about enterprise data, but I don't think we're really visually helping people understand exactly how much data are we talking about. Do you have like a way that we could explain this, over audio?
Oh no, that's a really good question. I wish I had a really good analogy there, but I would say that petabytes is actually a fairly large amount. You think about to the fifth degree. Just think about just the amount of data that is collected on just your personal hard drive. I look at my SharePoint drive, and you think about the number of files that you're saving on your iPhone, or just the amount of pictures that you're saving, and I look at the memory there. And companies have to, the funny thing is that companies have to comply with their document retention policies, and they are more risk averse when it comes to keeping files rather than deleting files. So think about just the amount of number of years your organization has been in business. They're more likely to keep it somewhere than to actually do a hard delete. So just the amount of data that's created on running the business, doing the operations with its employees. It's a crazy amount. I'm sure if you talk to your system owners,
I did you one better. This is the great thing about doing these Zoom calls is I looked it up on the internet while you were talking. So going back, I'm going to take your analogy. So going back to your analogy of my hard drive is in gigabytes.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have probably 100 gigabytes, 150 gigabytes of a hard drive. Well,
Mm-hmm.
according to the internet, 1 million gigabytes is 1 petabyte.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are talking about millions of petabytes of data.
Billions of,
So
yeah.
I think that at some point in the future, I'll come up with a better one. But yeah, that's a lot of data. Like that's a lot of data.
Yeah, no, but it's just not the amount. Okay, so that's one part of the puzzle, right?
Right.
Just the amount of data you have, but imagining having to comply with these different regulations. For example, I'll mention privacy regulations
Mm-hmm.
because that's cuts across all industries. They're asking privacy regulation and protection laws are asking specifically about data that can identify a person.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be anything from like certainly your name and social security number and email address and where you live, but also Melissa is talking about, your race, your ethnicity, your cookie settings. You just looked up something on the internet. What was your IP address for that? So
Yeah.
all that information that can describe you and can link back to you, Melissa Drew, it's imagine searching for all that inside all that petabytes of information, and to be able to do it real time, near real time, and to be able to do it
Mm.
accurately and completely. Those are the challenges that organizations are facing today, especially if they live if they do business or their customers live in a jurisdiction that falls under one of these privacy protection laws.
So then let's take all of that data and then now go back and apply your definition of governance. So if I'm sitting here with all this data, what you're doing is you're helping me understand how I can better govern that data. And I want to get your definition of what governing data means, because I also think that could be something that could be misinterpreted as well.
Yeah, so I'll be very prescriptive here
Okay.
when I describe how to start governing. Let's start with that. How to start governing all this massive amount of data that's available in the organization. So uh, I'll start with a story actually that a customer
Oh yeah, we love stories.
recently told me. And this is a large retail company, global retail company that we all have shopped for. It's a very common place to get not just your groceries, but your food, just everything in life. And one of the things that their data governance team has told us that even despite the size of their organization, and you would think the sophistication they have in all their technologies, it's because they operate globally and under multiple jurisdictions. They still don't know what their data is.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know where their data is, and then how it's all connected together. And that's a problem. And you just multiply that by all their customers and all the employees they have in their organization. um, it's very challenging. So the first step is, again, knowing what your data is. That's what the first step is to govern. You have to know what you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think is another common theme here. And in order to do that, there's a very common governance process that we all start with is inventorying.
Mm-hmm.
Inventorying is, just assessing all the things that you have, all the data sets, all the data sources, even looking at, things that you're creating internally or ingesting inside your company, creating an inventory of, what types of data it is a start. And a very similar concept to inventorying is cataloging.
Mm-hmm.
Cataloging is applying additional things like not just what it is, but starting to put ownership names of, who owns this information, like where is it actually located, in your organization so that you can start putting, making it a more searchable. Think of it as a searchable Wikipedia. I mean, I love saying that word, Wikipedia. The concept of Wikipedia is that anyone can, propose something or write an article, write a topic, or enhance something. Same with the concept of catalog. You want people in your organization to read and search through things, find the definition of things, and then be able to add on to it, enrich it, or make modifications to it as needed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the concept of cataloging. So you know where everything is and you know where it is, but then there's additional things like what I call classification. And classification actually comes up very frequently with all of our customers and everyone I've talked to, but BigID's definition is actually slightly different. So I'll give it a good example.
Mm-hmm.
So last week I was talking with a large financial services company who says, yeah, we want to do classification. And their definition of classification is what's internal, what's considered public, private usage.
That's like
And I said,
segmentation, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. That's a great start. But how do you expect downstream consumers like your data analysts, your data science teams, your modeling teams, how do you expect them to actually know what it is? And how do you expect them to build features for their model if they don't really understand that data? So from the onset, you should apply BigID's classification, which is actually tagging or labeling mechanism that actually can describe what that data value is. So helping leverage organizations' ontology of what things are, we can apply machine learning models to describe things right away, immediately inside the catalog. So not only can you look in this catalog to find what things are, but you actually understand the context
Mm-hmm.
of what it is, and help people use it faster because they actually can see and understand that value better. So those are just like the initial things that should be done. And I can talk more about things like data quality and having what I call a stewardship model, so that the right review and certification process is put in place for all these data assets. Those are all very important aspects to just building the foundation for a good data management program.
I want to follow up on something you just said. Specifically, you mentioned that the classification of the data was really what I thought you said was an underlying requirement, almost a mandatory requirement before you can start building those models. And I hadn't heard that before. I would really like to go a little bit deeper into that area, because I think you've hit on something that, again, everybody kind of glosses over the data governance and everybody kind of says, yes, I want my data clean. But I think we're not fully diving in deep and saying, hey, it's not just clean, it's not just classification. We can't even get to the next phase of this whole AI model, journey until, so what exactly are we typing? I mean, when you say categorizing your data, can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So this is something that I've learned really and I'll kind of give you some context because again, I think it's sorely missed and it's not discussed enough in the marketplace. And the reason why I love talking about this is because one of my responsibilities back when I was at Morgan Stanley was not only helping to build out the business glossary for wealth management, but it was also supporting our analytics team. And our analytics team, one of the struggles that I've seen them have was they were building these customer models. They were working on long-term studies and understanding our customer behaviors, understanding what triggered a customer to stay or to leave. And, we were really looking at different factors and behaviors. And what they needed was data, right? They wanted data from everything from, not just a customer account information, but also profiling our financial advisors. and figuring out what aspects of a financial advisor was either helping or helping the churn rate. So we looked at things like phone logs, number of minutes that were called and spent on the phone. So a lot of as much information as was possible. So imagine if you were a one of the data scientists in our analytics team. It was very difficult for them to look through a table, a structured table of all this information and really understand what exactly they were looking at, because sometimes the way that we defined a strategic customer versus a target customer, we used something like generic values like S and T to represent and to identify customers, to segment customers. And without having a proper business glossary, for example, to actually translate what these values meant, the end user, in this case being the data scientist, could not be able to run their models because they wanted to maybe target only the strategic customers. So having a business glossary to help put that definition in place was important. Secondly, there's actual values in the data, like for example, features, whether or not they were phone numbers or features like geography, or we looked at things like geography, like incomes. Those were all characteristics, and they needed to be tagged and classified. Classified meaning labeled properly, so that everyone understood these labels and were used consistently across all our data sources. So we look at the amount of tables and information, everything that is known inside a structured environment can easily be tagged and labeled properly or classified. What were opportunities that are available, not just at Morgan Stanley, but in other organizations, is a lot of the unstructured data. So information that's captured either in the Salesforce environment or the CRM environment or in emails. These are unstructured unstructured files, but the information could still pertain to inputs for a data scientist to put in their models. So that needed to be classified using the same classification manner that was done and applied on the structured tables.
And this is where the natural language processing comes in, the machine learning that augments a human. I couldn't imagine how many people now if I circle back to the very first comment you said when we introduced you, it was the amount of people, they couldn't find enough people to do the work. And I think you just connected the dots as to why they were looking for that amount of people. There's no way that you could get even a huge team of people to go through this much data. It'd be, probably half a decade or so just to classify and segment this kind of data and at the level that you really needed it to be.
Exactly. And in order to really be a true leader in the marketplace, any financial services organization, they have the data, they're just not using it in the right way, and they're not using it effectively and efficiently. I mean, they have the data, they cannot say that they couldn't do the models, but in order to actually mine that data and put it in a structure and a format that's usable and repeatable by their analytics teams, by the data scientists, those are the people in your organization that are trying to find insights and trying to add value for your organization. You have to give them access to the right data, but what predates that is obviously having the right data governance program in place in order to make all that possible.
Wow. Yeah, there's definitely a whole bunch here that we could get more into. I want to shift just a little bit because there's something else that you're doing that's really important. You are working with Carnegie Mellon, and it is what you've listed as an executive coach, but it's the Chief Data Officer Certification Program. And I want to clarify, it's the Heinz College School of Information Systems and Management. And I want to tie that back into your role that you have at BigID, because I think up until just recently, like just 2021, there wasn't a formal data program, or in this case, specifically a program that focuses on chief data officers. So I definitely want to make sure we have some time to talk about that.
Sure, I'm very happy to talk about that. I'm proud to be one of the executive coaches for the first cohort that launched earlier this year for the Heinz College Chief Data Officer Program. It's really one of the first programs that I've seen here in the US that focuses not just on what you need to know or the knowledge that's needed for a chief data officer, but it's actually taught by chief data officers, like real like practitioners. So it's really exciting. And my role as an executive coach is that I have a subset of the class of the students. So I lead a team. I had a team of 5 students, and just helping them throughout the milestones of their certification program, giving them guidance as well as my experience in the data management field, and how they can work through their assignments and work through their practicum at the end of the semester.
So you mentioned cohort. Is this just a one semester? Like when you say certification program, how long is the program?
Oh, it's a 6-month program.
Okay.
It's right now, because of COVID, it is meets virtually.
Yeah.
Starts out with once a week. And it's a fairly intensive course, I would have to say, but I would say the lectures are so engaging that it doesn't seem like you've been sitting virtually for 3 to 4 hours. And what's great is that not only are you sitting virtually in the classroom with your peers, you have lots of opportunity to meet many of the virtual lecturers that are also not just professors, but some of them are authors in the data governance space, and also running a chief data officer program at major companies today as well.
So if someone goes through this program 6 months later, what would they look like as an individual? What kind of experience should they expect to have?
Yeah, so all the graduates will have learned, I think, the fundamentals of data management, the capabilities, assessing a maturity model, building out a roadmap, putting a financial plan in place. And what I love about this program is that you're, from the very beginning, you're thinking like a chief data officer. So your team selects a company that you want to model after, and you spend the next 4 or 5 months pretending like you are the chief data officer. And so all your assignments and reports and papers are all based on the research of being a chief data officer in that type of company, in that type of industry. And it's very interesting, at the end of the semester, you hear the other students give their presentations from different industries. You see the similarities, but you see the differences and nuances, and how to be an effective chief data officer. There's some variations, but at the end of the day, a lot of similarities occur.
That's really cool. Congratulations for being part of that.
I feel lucky to be selected, to be one of the part of the teaching staff. So it's very exciting.
Well, unfortunately, we're wrapping up. Our time together is nearing its end. If we circle back to your role as Chief Data Officer at BigID, and with your background in how the data really folds into the analysis and the models, and the artificial intelligence is being used to help synthesize and the data. I mean, everything that we've talked about, it's all woven together. You can't have one without the other. And I've got this like scale, visual scale of my head, where the data side is on one side and the AI and the models and the analytics are on the other side, and they really have to balance each other out. So as we wrap up today with putting that hat back on for you, what are some of the things that you'd like to shout out for lessons learned, leave behinds, something that would, if I'm in your shoes or I have your role in my company, what can I think of tomorrow? I should have been thinking differently all along and just didn't realize it.
Sure. So my role at BigID is to really help organizations, data executives understand how they can be leveraging machine learning much better in their organization today. So while I have this new role, it's a dual role, right? Where I'm talking to a lot of customers and prospects, really understanding their pain points. And what I hear frequently is that their team is very small. They have a very small budget. How can a tool like BigID help me?
Right.
How can I see results faster? I just don't have the time to put into this. So that's one example where we love to come in and really show our value right away with our discovery platform, our ability to connect to all your data sources, look at your holistic data governance program, and start applying a lot of these machine learning algorithms to give you the insights right away. So I love talking about that. And secondly, another pain point that organizations have is that it's not a data program that's funding. It's usually a privacy or security that has a bigger concern. So think about data management holistically. I think chief privacy officers, security officers, they all are asking and utilizing data, but work with your chief data officer, work with your data management teams, because I think that by applying good data governance practices once, it can be reused, and scalable and leverageable for many use cases across the organization. So think about that when you're coming up with your budget. And then I think just to talk about internally what my role at BigID as well, while it's external facing, internally, I'm very excited about applying a lot of the best practices that I talk about internally at a company, at a new startup like BigID. So it's very exciting to think about data standards, best reporting practices, a lot of the challenges that organizations face today. So I'm excited about doing that in my new role as Chief Data Officer.
I hope you enjoy your role. It sounds like it's the right place and the right time. The term data geek kind of came in my head a couple times. I think anybody that really, really loves data and getting down to the field level and then talking to it, for 3 or 4 hours at a time, like what you mentioned earlier, there's got to be some passion there that just isn't there for others.
Certainly.
So I can hear it when you talk about it and you smile. For those of you who are listening to the audio portion of this podcast, she is smiling when she talks. Awesome. Any you personally? So, any lessons learned?
I think in the last year, I've learned to not to make assumptions.
Yeah.
And one of the things about being a data steward in the past 10 years that I've been a data steward, the reason why we have a business glossary is that people come from different backgrounds and perspectives. And what they bring to the table is sometimes a different understanding with each other, right? It's a good lesson in life to always make sure that two people are understanding the same thing. And the same thing about data governance. People have different understandings of what a catalog means, what an inventory really means, what classification means. I use that story, I mentioned it earlier, about my practitioner perspective and definition of classification, and what BigID as a vendor is trying to educate the marketplace on. It's two different things coming from two different backgrounds. So that's why it's always important to maybe just start a conversation. The first thing is, this is what we're talking about, right? Just lay out a definition out there and just get confirmation from the other party. And that always helps. That always gets everyone on the same page and making the conversation much more fruitful. So I like to do that in business and personal life, and it's made a lot of things much easier. So I would give that advice for anyone, not just at work, but outside of work as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa. I really enjoyed being here today as well.